In the quiet places of the world where ancient stones hold the chill of forgotten centuries, a deeper silence often resides. It's a silence that speaks not of emptiness, but of stories held in trust, waiting for a patient ear. Within the hushed interiors of Norman chapels or the crumbling ramparts of a forgotten fortress, the air itself seems thick with memory. Here, the modern world fades away, and one can almost hear the faint echo of chanted prayers, the distant clang of steel, and the rustle of heavy woolen cloaks. These are the spaces where history breathes, where the past is not truly gone but merely sleeps, dreaming of its former glories and its most profound sorrows. This story begins not with a shout but with a whisper. It is a tale woven into the very fabric of the medieval consciousness, a mystery that has endured the ravages of time, war, and disbelief. It concerns a brotherhood of warriors, men who took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, yet commanded wealth that could rival the treasuries of kings. They were monks who wielded swords, knights who answered only to the Pope, and, in a twist of fate that would seal their doom, bankers who pioneered a system of international finance that was centuries ahead of its time. Their name still evokes a sense of awe and intrigue, the Knights Templar. Their journey is one of incredible ascent and spectacular, brutal downfall. It is a narrative of profound faith and earthly power, of sacred duty and worldly ambition. We imagine them as figures of righteous strength, their white mantles emblazoned with a stark red cross, symbols of their unwavering commitment to protecting pilgrims on the perilous roads to the Holy Land. Yet behind this martial image lies a more complex and perhaps more influential reality. They were innovators, administrators, and financiers whose acumen laid the groundwork for systems we still recognize today. Their story is a lesson in how trust can be forged, how influence can be built, and how quickly it can all be brought to ruin by greed and fear. The silence of their ruined commanderies and desecrated graves asks a question that has haunted historians and treasure hunters for 700 years. What truly happened to them? And more pressingly, what became of their immense, almost unimaginable, wealth? It vanished from the pages of history as suddenly and as completely as the order itself. This is not just a story of knights and battles, but of secrets kept under lock and key, of coded letters and hidden vaults. It is the story of the Knights Templar, and the financial empire they built, an empire whose foundations were not just stone and steel, but something far more powerful: trust. The narrative of the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, as they were formerly known, is a paradox written across the medieval landscape. They began as a humble fraternity, a small band of knights dedicated to a noble and dangerous cause. In the fledgling Crusader states, where the roads were beset by bandits and the threat of attack was constant, they offered a shield to the faithful. Their initial poverty was so pronounced that their seal famously depicted two knights sharing a single horse, a potent symbol of their destitution and brotherhood. This image of austerity and piety was the bedrock upon which their reputation was built, earning them the favor of the Church and the admiration of Christendom. Over 2 centuries, this humble brotherhood evolved into something else entirely. Their network of influence stretched from the dusty plains of Outremer to the misty shores of Scotland. They became landowners on a colossal scale, controlling vast estates, farms, vineyards, and mills across Europe. They built castles and churches, commanded their own fleet of ships, and operated with a level of autonomy that was the envy of secular rulers. They became a state within a state, a multinational corporation cloaked in the sanctity of a holy order. Their white mantles were no longer just the uniform of a pilgrim guard, they were the sigil of an institution with immense political and economic power. This transformation from warrior monks to international financiers was gradual, born of necessity and opportunity. The trust they inspired was their greatest asset. A nobleman leaving for the Crusades could entrust his lands and affairs to the Templars, confident that they would be managed honestly and returned upon his homecoming, or passed to his heirs should he fall in battle. This role as trusted custodians of wealth was a natural extension of their duty to protect pilgrims. It was this impeccable reputation for integrity that allowed them to create a financial system that was revolutionary, a system built on faith in their name alone, long before the laws of modern banking were ever conceived. Yet with great power comes great suspicion. As their wealth grew, so too did the whispers and rumors that swirled around them. Their secrecy, once a necessary precaution for their operations, began to be viewed as sinister. What rituals took place behind the closed doors of their preceptories? To whom did they truly swear allegiance? Their immunity from local laws and taxes, granted by papal decree, bred resentment among kings and bishops who saw their authority undermined. The Templars, who had once been the celebrated protectors of Christendom, were slowly becoming viewed as a threat, their influence a challenge to the established order of throne and altar. The genesis of the Templars' financial empire can be traced back to a simple, practical problem faced by every pilgrim of the age: the danger of carrying money. The journey to Jerusalem was long and fraught with peril. Travelers were easy targets for thieves, and carrying large sums of gold and silver was an open invitation to disaster. The Templars, with their fortified commanderies dotted along the major pilgrimage routes, were uniquely positioned to offer a solution. They understood the landscape, the dangers, and the needs of the people they had sworn to protect. Their mission was not merely to guard the roads, but to make the entire pilgrimage possible, and that included safeguarding a traveler's resources. Their solution was ingenious in its simplicity and profound in its implications. A pilgrim could deposit their money at the Templar temple in London or Paris, and receive in return a coded letter of credit. This piece of parchment, unintelligible to any thief who might steal it, was a promise. Upon arriving in the Holy Land, the pilgrim could present the letter at a Templar house in Acre or Jerusalem, and withdraw their funds in the local currency. This system effectively eliminated the risk of carrying cash over thousands of miles. It was the first truly international system of credit transfer, a medieval forerunner to the traveler's check, built not on complex laws but on the unimpeachable brand of the Templar order. This innovation was the key that unlocked their financial dominance. The service was so valuable that it was soon used not just by pilgrims, but by merchants, nobles, and kings. The Templars became the de facto bankers for much of Europe and the Crusader states. They managed accounts, transferred massive sums of money for military campaigns, and acted as treasurers for monarchs. King Philip IV of France, the very man who would later orchestrate their destruction, used the Paris temple as his royal treasury for a time. The Templars developed sophisticated accounting methods, using ciphers to protect their ledgers and ensuring that their financial network operated with ruthless efficiency and discretion. This immense financial responsibility existed alongside their martial duties. A knight might spend one day training with a sword, and the next poring over accounts and loan agreements. They were a hybrid institution, blending the discipline of the monastery, the prowess of the barracks, and the acumen of the counting house. This unique combination of skills made them formidable. They were not just bankers, they were bankers who commanded their own private army and were accountable to no earthly king. This concentration of military, spiritual, and financial power in a single order was unprecedented, and it sowed the seeds of their own tragic and violent end. The world of the early 12th century was one of fervent faith and profound danger. For the devout Christians of Europe, the ultimate act of piety was the pilgrimage, a journey to walk in the footsteps of Christ in the Holy Land. Yet, this sacred path was anything but peaceful. Following the success of the First Crusade and the establishment of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the routes into the Levant were opened, but they were not secure. The roads that wound through the rocky hills and desolate plains between the port city of Jaffa and the holy city of Jerusalem were treacherous. They were haunted by bandits, opportunistic local lords, and remnants of defeated armies who preyed upon the vulnerable. For the pilgrims, many of whom had sold all their worldly possessions to fund their journey, the final miles were often the most deadly. They traveled in small, poorly defended groups, their unfamiliarity with the terrain making them easy targets. They were weary from their long sea voyage, often weakened by sickness and unaccustomed to the harsh climate. The dream of kneeling in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre could easily turn into a nightmare of robbery, enslavement, or death. The very roads that should have led them to salvation were instead pathways to despair. The promise of the Crusader kingdom seemed hollow if its most devout visitors could not reach their destination safely. This was the stark reality that confronted the Christian world. A great victory had been won, but its fruits were in jeopardy. The local Christian rulers, their forces stretched thin defending vast and hostile borders, had few men to spare for policing the pilgrim trails. The need was desperate and immediate. A new kind of protection was required, one born not of conquest, but of service. Someone had to stand guard over the faithful, to create a shield for the unarmed, and a beacon of hope in a land still rife with conflict. The problem was not one of military strategy, but of simple, dedicated guardianship. Into this dangerous vacuum stepped a small group of men. They were not kings or princes, but knights who had remained in the Holy Land after the great armies had returned home. They saw the suffering of the pilgrims firsthand, and were moved by a sense of pious duty. They understood that the spiritual heart of Christendom was at risk, not from a grand army, but from the chaos that festered along its arteries. Their solution would not be to conquer more land or to build great castles of their own, but to dedicate themselves to a single, humble, and immensely dangerous task: to protect the pilgrims on the road to Jerusalem. The year is often given as 1119. In the city of Jerusalem, still bearing the scars of its recent conquest, two French knights approached the king, Baldwin II. Their names were Hugues de Payan and Godfrey de Saint-Omer. They were veterans of the Crusade, men who had witnessed both the fervor of victory and the brutal aftermath of war. They put forward a radical proposal. They and a handful of their companions wished to form a new kind of religious community. They would take monastic vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, living as monks. But unlike other religious orders, they would not retreat from the world into a cloister. Instead, they would take up the sword in service of God. Their mission, as they presented it to the king and the Patriarch of Jerusalem, was clear and focused. They would dedicate their lives to the protection of Christian travelers. They asked for no land, no titles, and no reward, save for sustenance and a place to live. Theirs was to be an order of warrior monks, a concept that was both novel and perfectly suited to the needs of the Crusader states. King Baldwin, recognizing the value of such a dedicated force, readily agreed. He granted them a headquarters in a wing of his own palace, a building that stood upon the holiest ground in the city, the Temple Mount, believed to be the site of the ancient Temple of Solomon. This small band of founders numbered only 9 knights. For nearly a decade, they remained a tiny and obscure fraternity. They adopted a simple, austere lifestyle, their poverty so real that their first seal famously depicted 2 knights sharing a single horse, a powerful symbol of both their destitution and their communal brotherhood. They wore no distinctive habit, instead using donated cast-off clothing. They patrolled the dangerous road to Jerusalem, a small but determined presence against the lawlessness of the region. They were the poor fellow soldiers of Christ, a name that reflected their humble origins and their sacred self-appointed duty to their fellow Christians. Their commitment did not go unnoticed. While their numbers remained small, their reputation for courage and piety began to grow. They were seen as embodying the purest ideals of the Crusades, the selfless defense of the faith. The idea of a knight taking a vow of poverty and dedicating his martial skills to God was a powerful one that resonated deeply across Christendom. The support of King Baldwin and the Patriarch of Jerusalem gave them legitimacy, but it was their actions on the sun-scorched roads of the Holy Land that began to lay the foundations of their legend. They were a whisper of hope, a promise that faith and the sword could unite for a noble cause. The location of the Knights' first headquarters was of immense symbolic importance. The building granted to them by King Baldwin II was the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which the Crusaders believed stood on the very foundations of the original Temple of Solomon. For the medieval Christian mind, there was no holier site on earth save for the Holy Sepulchre itself. This was the ground where God's presence was said to have dwelt, the heart of an ancient and sacred mystery. By establishing their base there, the new order became inextricably linked to this powerful legacy. They were no longer just the poor fellow soldiers of Christ. They became the Knights of the Temple of Solomon, or more simply the Knights Templar. This association was a masterstroke of branding, whether intentional or not. The Temple of Solomon evoked images of wisdom, immense wealth, and a direct connection to God. It lent the fledgling order an aura of ancient authority and divine sanction. They were not merely guards on a dusty road, they were the guardians of the holiest site in Christendom. This powerful symbolism was not lost on the people of Europe. It transformed the perception of the order from a small local militia into something far grander and more mystical. The name itself was an advertisement for their piety and their unique sacred purpose within the celestial hierarchy. Living and praying in such a location profoundly shaped the identity of the knights themselves. They were surrounded by the echoes of biblical history, walking on stones that were, in their minds, saturated with holiness. This environment would have reinforced their sense of divine mission and the gravity of their vows. The rule of their order, which would later be formalized with the help of the influential abbot Bernard of Clairvaux, was strict and demanding. It governed every aspect of their lives, from their twice-daily prayers and communal meals eaten in silence to the maintenance of their weapons and armor. They were a disciplined elite force, shaped by monastic rigor and military necessity. From this hallowed base their influence began to radiate outwards. The name Templar became a byword for steadfastness and holy purpose. In 1129 at the Council of Troyes, the order was formally recognized by the Pope and granted its own rule. This papal endorsement was the critical step that transformed them from a local fraternity into an international institution. With the Church's official blessing, they could now recruit members and raise funds across the whole of Europe. The Nine Knights had become the leadership of a new and powerful force. Their headquarters at the Temple of Solomon, now the symbolic center of a network that was destined to grow at an astonishing pace. Initially, the Templars' role was purely martial. They were knights, trained for combat, and their purpose was to fight. They would escort caravans of pilgrims, riding ahead and behind the main group, their presence a deterrent to any would-be attackers. In an age where the line between soldier and bandit was often blurred, the Templars stood apart. Their vows of poverty meant they had no personal interest in theft or ransom, and their religious devotion gave them a reputation for incorruptibility. A pilgrim under Templar protection knew they were being guarded by men who had renounced worldly gain and sought only spiritual reward. This created a level of trust that no mercenary company or feudal levy could ever hope to match. This trust soon evolved beyond the battlefield. Pilgrims began to ask the knights for another kind of protection. As well as guarding their bodies, could the Templars also guard their valuables? A traveler might carry letters of introduction, sentimental relics, or legal documents like wills and deeds. Losing these items to a thief could be as devastating as losing one's life. The Templars, with their fortified houses or commanderies which were beginning to spring up along the pilgrimage routes, were the logical choice for safekeeping. A pilgrim could leave a sealed pouch with the Templars in one town, knowing it would be kept secure until they could reclaim it further down the road. This function as trusted custodians was a natural and organic extension of their original mission. It was not a grand plan for financial domination, but a practical response to a real-world need. The Templars were reliable, they were organized, and most importantly, they were always present. Their order was a permanent institution, unlike the individual lords and knights who came and went. If a knight died, the order continued. This permanence made them the ideal guardians of long-term assets. A nobleman leaving for the Holy Land could entrust his entire estate to the Templars' management, confident that his affairs would be handled honestly while he was away. This shift from a purely military role to one of guardianship was the first quiet step towards their financial empire. They were not yet bankers in the modern sense. They were guardians, trustees, and protectors. They were building a reputation not just for their prowess with the sword, but for their integrity with the strongbox. The shield they offered was no longer just a physical one against bandits, but a conceptual one against loss and uncertainty. This foundation of absolute trust, built over decades of selfless service, would become the bedrock upon which they would, almost by accident, invent a new form of international finance that would change the medieval world. The journey to the Holy Land was not just a spiritual test. For every hopeful pilgrim, it was a gauntlet of dangers. Robbers, extortionists, and corrupt officials lurked along the narrow tracks and bustling ports. Men and women, carrying the life savings of entire families, faced a cruel reality. Gold and silver needed for passage, food, and offerings could vanish in an instant. Stories spread of pilgrims left penniless by highwaymen, or forced into debt slavery after a single ambush. The road to salvation wound through a minefield of loss. Here, the Templars saw an opportunity born of necessity. They understood the fear that stalked the devout along the trade routes. Their fortified houses stood as beacons of safety, offering not only armed escort but something more radical, a promise of financial security. Pilgrims could leave their coin and valuables with the order, receiving a carefully written document in return. This was not a simple receipt. It was the quiet beginning of something entirely new, a portable, secure claim to wealth that could be redeemed far from home. In this system, the Templars took on a role both humble and revolutionary. They became the trusted middlemen of Christendom, their name a guarantee more powerful than any lock or iron chest. The risks of the journey were now greatly reduced. If a thief took your purse, it was a loss. If a thief took your letter, it was only a piece of parchment, useless without the secrets known only to the Templars themselves. This innovation was a product of the Order's unique position. Warriors bound by vows, they inspired confidence in all classes, peasants and princes alike. The financial relationship between Templar and Pilgrim was built on the very foundation of trust that the Order had spent decades earning on the battlefields and roads of the Holy Land. Gradually, the Templars' role as guardians of both soul and silver became inseparable. Medieval banking was born not in the counting rooms of merchants, but in the perilous twilight between the altar and the sword. The Templars' greatest contribution to medieval finance was the letter of credit. To the modern eye, it looks deceptively simple, a parchment marked with ink sealed with wax and inscribed with secret symbols. But for a medieval pilgrim, it was a lifeline. The process began at a Templar preceptory in Europe, perhaps in the shadowed halls of the temple in Paris or beneath the rose window of London's Temple Church. The pilgrim would deposit a sum of money, surrendering their coins to the Order's custody. In exchange, they received a letter, the details of which were known only to trusted brothers of the Order. This letter was more than a note, it was a coded instruction. The Templars developed internal ciphers and marks that only their officials could decipher. These codes recorded not just the amount, but the identity and destination of the holder, ensuring that only the rightful bearer could claim the funds. In the event of loss or theft, the letter became useless to anyone but the intended pilgrim. This closely guarded system was an early form of the traveler's check, centuries before the idea would resurface in the modern world. The network of Templar houses, stretching from the windswept fields of England to the hot, stony courtyards of Jerusalem, allowed these credits to be transferred across vast distances. Each house communicated with its fellows through regular couriers, updating ledgers and confirming the authenticity of letters. The secrecy of the system was legendary. Not even kings could force the Templars to reveal the details of their clients' affairs. This discretion reinforced the Order's mystique, feeding both their reputation and the rumors that would one day bring about their ruin. In the dim candlelight of their scriptoriums, Templar clerks painstakingly recorded every transaction. The code was known only to a few senior brothers, and the methods were passed down in hushed instruction. To outsiders, the process appeared nearly magical, a sacred art, binding Christian Europe in invisible threads of trust. The Templars' letters of credit did not just move money, they moved confidence, allowing men and women to cross continents with their fortunes intact, shielded by faith in a red cross and a hidden cipher. The efficiency of Templar banking depended on more than clever letters. It required a vast, disciplined network, one that was, in its day, without equal. The Order's commanderies became outposts of stability, their stone walls sheltering not just knights but clerks, scribes, and administrators. Each house was linked to the others by a steady flow of messengers carrying news, instructions, and financial records along the arteries of Christendom. The Templars maintained their own fleet of ships, ensuring communication even across troubled seas. Within this network, rules were strict. Brothers were rotated between houses, not only to prevent corruption, but to ensure the uniformity of procedure. Ledgers were kept in duplicate, one copy remaining at the local house, the other sent to the Order's treasury in Paris or Jerusalem. Funds deposited in London could be drawn out in Acre, and every transaction was carefully recorded, verified, and reconciled. This attention to detail was rare in an age when most nobles kept their accounts on scraps of parchment or in memory alone. The Order's international privileges, granted by papal bulls, allowed them to operate independently of local laws and taxes. This autonomy gave them an advantage over rival institutions. They could move gold and silver across borders without interference from greedy kings or suspicious bishops, and their vaults became the chosen resting place for royal treasuries and church tithes. The Templars' impartiality was legendary. They offered the same service to humble pilgrims as to monarchs and bishops, earning a reputation for fairness that was the envy of every moneylender and merchant in Europe. This pan-European infrastructure was the true marvel of Templar banking. It allowed them to guarantee payments, settle debts, and facilitate trade on a scale that no single kingdom could match. The sight of the red cross above a commandery door became a symbol of security and reliability. In a world of shifting borders and uncertain justice, the Templars offered something rare, a promise that a man's wealth would be waiting for him no matter how far he traveled or how long he wandered. Beyond letters of credit, the Templars quickly found themselves managing a growing array of financial services. Pilgrims and nobles alike entrusted them with deposits, secure in the knowledge that the order's resources and discipline would protect their fortunes. Over time, the Templars began to lend money, both to individuals and to monarchs, charging moderate fees or accepting repayment in land, privileges, or political favors. Their vaults in Paris and London became the safest repositories in Europe, so much so that even kings, including the later enemies of the order, kept their treasuries there. The Templar counting house was a scene of quiet industry. In rooms lined with chests and ledgers, clerks counted coin by candlelight, recording every transaction in neat coded script. Their bookkeeping methods were advanced for the age. Double-entry accounting, while not fully developed, was foreshadowed in their careful balancing of debit and credit, deposit and withdrawal. Security was paramount. Vaults were sealed with multiple locks, each key held by a different brother, and every opening was witnessed and signed. These financial services soon extended beyond the needs of the pilgrim. European nobles, often absent on crusade or embroiled in local wars, relied on the Templars to manage their estates, collect rents, and pay debts. Church officials deposited tithes, which the order would transfer to Rome or Jerusalem as needed. The Templars became the trusted bankers of Christendom, their clients ranging from the humblest widow to the Pope himself. In this quietly lit world of parchment and wax, the Templars forged the template for banking as we know it today. Their methods, precise, secretive, and disciplined, allowed money to flow across continents, supporting crusades, commerce, and pilgrimage alike. The counting house and the chapel stood side by side, and the sound of prayer was matched by the soft clink of coin. The birth of Templar banking was not a single invention but a series of steps, each one rooted in necessity and each one building towards a system that would change the world. The financial innovations of the Templars, born from the simple need to protect pilgrims, quickly blossomed into something far grander. What began as a service became the foundation of an empire built not on conquered territory, but on an intricate web of trust and obligation. This empire's outposts were the commanderies or preceptories, which began to appear across the length and breadth of Christendom. These were not merely military barracks or monastic houses, they were multifunctional hubs of Templar power. Each one was a fortress, a farm, a chapel, and crucially a branch of an international bank. Their stone walls, often built in strategic locations along trade and pilgrimage routes, projected an image of permanence and security in a volatile world. The growth of this network was staggering. From the misty fields of Ireland to the sun-drenched vineyards of Spain, from the bustling ports of Italy to the remote forests of Poland, the Templar cross became a familiar sight. By the late 13th century, the order controlled thousands of these properties. This geographical spread was the physical infrastructure of their financial system. It meant that a merchant in London could do business with a partner in Cyprus, with the Templars acting as the secure intermediary for the entire transaction. This was a level of integration and reach that no secular kingdom, with its shifting borders and rivalries, could ever hope to achieve. The Templars operated beyond the petty squabbles of lords and kings. At the heart of this network was a disciplined and hierarchical command structure. Instructions flowed from the Grand Master and the central houses in Paris and London out to the most distant preceptory. Regular communication was maintained by a dedicated corps of messengers who traveled the roads of Europe carrying coded letters and financial reports. This ensured that practices were standardized across the entire order. The methods for accepting a deposit, issuing a letter of credit, or recording a loan were the same in a small English commandery as they were in the Grand Temple in Paris. This consistency was the key to their reliability and the source of their clients' unwavering confidence. This vast and organized system was more than just a collection of buildings, it was a living entity. It was an institution whose reputation for integrity was its most valuable asset. The trust placed in the Templars was absolute, earned over decades of reliable service. People knew that a deal struck with the order would be honored, a deposit would be safe, and a message would be delivered. This reputation allowed them to build a financial empire that transcended national boundaries, creating a unified economic space across a fractured continent. The stones of their commanderies were merely the visible shell. The true foundation was the invisible yet unbreakable bond of trust they had forged with the whole of Christendom. The Templars' wealth did not come solely from financial services. A significant and ever-growing portion of their power was rooted in the land itself. From their earliest days, the order received donations from pious nobles and grateful patrons. A knight joining the order would often bequeath his family lands, while monarchs and lords seeking favor with God and the Church would grant them vast estates. These gifts, accumulated over 2 centuries, transformed the Templars into one of the largest landowners in all of Europe. They controlled immense tracts of farmland, forests, vineyards, and even entire villages, making them a dominant force in the agrarian economy of the medieval world. They were not, however, passive landowners. The Templars managed their estates with the same discipline and efficiency they applied to their financial and military affairs. They were agricultural innovators, employing advanced farming techniques to maximize the yield from their lands. They cleared forests, drained marshes, and established mills and smithies, turning unproductive holdings into profitable enterprises. The revenues from these activities, the sale of wool, wine, grain, and other produce, provided a steady and substantial income stream that funded their operations in the Holy Land and further cemented their economic power back in Europe. Their commanderies were often the most productive and best-run farms in their region. This role as landlords also gave them immense local influence. The people who lived and worked on Templar lands were, for all practical purposes, their subjects. The order collected rents, administered justice in local disputes, and oversaw the daily economic life of thousands of peasants and artisans. A Templar commandery was the center of its local community, a source of employment and stability. This deep integration into the fabric of rural life meant their power was not just an abstract concept confined to the courts of kings, it was a tangible reality felt in villages and fields across the continent. They were not just bankers in distant cities, they were the local lords of the manor. This vast portfolio of property and agricultural enterprise made the order almost entirely self-sufficient. They produced their own food, bred their own war horses, and generated the capital needed for their building projects and military campaigns. This economic independence was another source of their unique power. While kings had to beg their nobles for taxes and merchants worried about trade routes, the Templars stood on a solid foundation of land and produce. This immense, tangible wealth, combined with their liquid capital from banking, created a financial behemoth whose resources could rival and in some cases exceed those of the most powerful European monarchies. As the Templars' reputation for financial acumen and absolute discretion grew, their clientele began to include the most powerful individuals in Christendom. It was one thing to handle the savings of a humble pilgrim, but it was another entirely to be entrusted with the treasuries of kings and the finances of the papacy itself. The Paris Temple, the order's great headquarters in the city, evolved into an unofficial royal treasury for the French crown. Kings, including Louis IX and even their eventual destroyer, Philip IV, deposited state revenues there, used the Templars to transfer funds, and relied on their administrative skills to manage complex royal accounts. The Knights became the trusted financial advisors to the French monarchy. This relationship was well replicated across Europe. In England, the London Temple played a similar role, acting as a secure repository for crown jewels and state funds. English kings frequently borrowed from the order to finance their wars and state-building projects. The Templars were not just simple moneylenders, their loans were sophisticated financial instruments. They could arrange for a king to borrow money in London and have the funds made available to his armies in Gascony or the Holy Land. They negotiated terms, managed repayments, and held royal assets as collateral, operating with a level of professionalism that was unmatched by any other institution. Their most important client, however, was the papacy. The Templars were answerable only to the Pope, and this direct line of allegiance made them the natural bankers for the Holy See. The Church collected tithes and levies from every corner of Christendom, and it was often the Templars who were tasked with the complex and dangerous job of collecting these funds and transferring them to Rome. They managed papal accounts, dispersed funds for crusades, and acted as the financial agents of the Vatican across Europe. This intimate connection with the papacy gave them immense prestige and protected them from the interference of local bishops and secular rulers. By becoming the bankers to the powerful, the Templars placed themselves at the very center of European politics and finance. They were privy to the secrets of state, aware of the financial strengths and weaknesses of kingdoms, and involved in the highest levels of diplomacy. Their role was essential. They were the financial glue that helped hold the medieval world together. However, this proximity to power was a double-edged sword. To be a creditor to a king is a powerful position, but it is also a dangerous one. When a monarch's debts become too large and their need for money too great, the creditor can easily become a target. The Templars' influence was not confined to the land. To maintain their vast international network and to support their primary mission in the Holy Land, the Order built and operated its own fleet of ships. This Templar navy was a critical component of their power, giving them control over the vital arteries of communication and transport across the Mediterranean Sea. Their ships, often marked with the distinctive Red Cross, were a common sight in the major ports of Marseille, Genoa, Venice, and Acre. They ferried knights, horses, supplies and pilgrims to the east, forming a logistical lifeline for the Crusader states. This maritime capability gave them a significant commercial advantage. While their primary purpose was logistical support for the Order, Templar ships also carried goods and passengers for a fee. They offered a secure and reliable alternative to the often unpredictable services of private merchants. A nobleman or a merchant could book passage or freight space on a Templar vessel, confident in the knowledge that it would be well defended and professionally managed. The Order's ships were among the largest and most advanced of their time, built for capacity and defense, and their captains were experienced mariners. This maritime enterprise became another lucrative source of revenue for the Order. The fleet was also essential for their financial operations. It allowed them to move bullion and specie securely between their commanderies in Europe and their treasuries in the Levant. While the letter of credit system reduced the need to transport large amounts of coin for individual travelers, the Order still needed to balance its books and move its own assets. Owning their own ships meant they did not have to rely on third parties, which enhanced the security and secrecy of their financial transfers. The Templar fleet was, in essence, a fleet of armored bank vaults, ensuring their wealth could be deployed wherever it was needed most. The existence of this powerful private navy further underscored the Order's unique status as a state within a state. No other religious order, and, few secular lords, commanded such a formidable presence on the seas. This control over maritime transport allowed them to project their power far beyond the coasts of Europe, connecting their land-based empire into a truly integrated whole. The creak of the timbers on a Templar galley and the snap of its Red Cross sail in the wind were the sounds of their empire in motion, a testament to an organization that had mastered not just the ledger and the sword, but the very waves themselves. The single most important factor in the rise of the Templar Empire was their extraordinary political and legal autonomy. Through a series of papal bulls, most notably Omni Datum Optimum issued in 1139, the Order was removed from the jurisdiction of all local authorities, both secular and ecclesiastical. They were not required to pay tithes to local bishops. Their houses were sanctuaries free from the intrusion of royal officials, and their members could only be judged by the Pope himself. This unparalleled freedom allowed them to operate as a sovereign entity, a multinational corporation with diplomatic immunity in every country where they established a presence. This special status was the bedrock of their financial success. It meant they could move capital across borders without paying the taxes and tariffs that burdened secular merchants. It allowed them to enforce their own contracts and manage their own affairs according to their own internal rule, free from the often meddlesome interference of local lords or bishops. This independence is what made them so trustworthy as a third party. A king could deposit his treasury in the Paris temple knowing that no rival noble, nor even a hostile archbishop, could lay a hand on it. The Templar cross symbolized a zone of neutrality and legal protection. This autonomy, however, bred deep resentment. Kings grew wary of an organization within their borders that did not answer to them, an organization that was wealthier and better organized than their own administration. Bishops bristled at the loss of revenue from tithes and the sight of Templar chapels operating outside their authority. The Order's secrecy, born of a need to protect their financial and military intelligence, began to look sinister to outsiders. Their private chapter meetings and initiation rituals, from which all non-Templars were barred, became the subject of dark and suspicious rumors. Their privilege was seen as arrogance. Ultimately, the very factors that enabled the rise of their financial empire also sowed the seeds of its destruction. Their immense wealth, their political independence, their secretiveness, and their international reach created a powerful and envied institution. They were a state within every state, yet loyal to none of them, save for a distant pope. This made them powerful, but it also left them isolated. When a powerful and indebted king decided that the order had outlived its usefulness, the Templars would discover that their unique autonomy had left them with few allies willing to defend them. The Red Cross, once a symbol of protection, would become a target. The Knights Templar, by their very nature, were an institution shrouded in secrecy. This was not initially born of a sinister motive, but of practical necessity. Their financial operations, involving coded letters and discreet transfers of vast sums, depended on confidentiality to function. Their military intelligence from the Holy Land, detailing troop movements and strategic vulnerabilities, was of immense value and had to be protected from enemies. Furthermore, as a closed monastic order, their internal affairs, chapter meetings, and initiation ceremonies were private, reserved for the eyes and ears of sworn brothers only. This exclusivity was a core part of their identity, reinforcing the bond between members and setting them apart from the outside world. Yet, what was once a shield of necessity slowly curdled into a cloak of suspicion. To the common person, and even to the nobles and clergy excluded from their inner circle, this secrecy was unnerving. As the Templars' power and wealth grew, so too did the questions about what truly happened behind the high walls of their commanderies. Rumors, fed by a mixture of envy, ignorance, and genuine mistrust, began to circulate. People whispered of strange rites conducted in the dead of night, of rituals that deviated from orthodox Christian practice. The very privacy that protected their operations now made them vulnerable to the darkest of accusations, as there were no outside witnesses to refute the claims. These whispers found fertile ground in a Europe that was increasingly anxious about heresy and nonconformity. The Templars' unique position, answering only to the Pope, meant they were outside the normal chains of command and social control. They were a society within society, with their own rules and their own loyalties. Stories began to emerge, fantastical and grim, of knights being forced to deny Christ upon their initiation, of spitting on the cross, and of worshipping a mysterious bearded head known as Baphomet. While likely the product of malicious gossip, these tales were difficult to disprove precisely because of the order's impenetrable secrecy. The mystique that had once been a source of the Templars' strength and prestige began to work against them. Their immense wealth, coupled with their private rituals, created a potent and dangerous combination. They were seen as arrogant, aloof, and unaccountable. The white mantle with its red cross, once a symbol of pure faith and selfless service, started to take on a more ambiguous meaning in the public imagination. It became the emblem of an organization that was perceived as having too much money, too much power, and far too many secrets. The shadow of this secrecy would provide the perfect darkness in which their enemies could gather and strike. By the dawn of the 14th century, the Kingdom of France was in a perilous state, and at its head was a king of ruthless ambition, Philip IV, known as Philip the Fair. He was a monarch driven by a powerful vision of a centralized and absolute French state, a vision that required vast and constant infusions of cash. He had waged costly wars against England and in Flanders, debased the kingdom's coinage multiple times to raise funds, and had already expelled the Jews and the Lombard bankers from France, seizing their assets to fill his depleted coffers. Philip was a king perpetually in debt, and his gaze was constantly searching for new sources of revenue to fund his state-building project. His relationship with the Knights Templar was complex and deeply hypocritical. For years the Paris Temple had served as the French royal treasury. The Templars were his bankers, managing his accounts and providing him with enormous loans to finance his military campaigns and lavish court. Philip knew better than anyone the sheer scale of the order's wealth, for he was one of its largest debtors. The very institution that propped up his kingdom was also a constant reminder of his financial dependence. To a king who believed in absolute authority, being beholden to a group of warrior monks who answered to a foreign power, the Pope, was an intolerable situation. The Templars represented everything that stood in the way of Philip's ambition. They were an autonomous power within his own kingdom, possessing immense wealth that was beyond his legal reach. They paid no taxes to him, and their loyalty was not to the French crown, but to Rome. For Philip and his coterie of calculating ministers, led by the formidable Guillaume de Nogaret, the Templars were a tempting and vulnerable target. Destroying the order presented a perfect solution to multiple problems at once. It would cancel the crown's immense debts, allow for the seizure of the Templars' vast assets in France, and eliminate a powerful independent institution from his realm. The plan that began to form in the secret councils of the king was audacious and brutal. It was not enough to simply seize their wealth, the order had to be utterly discredited to justify such an action. The whispers and rumors of heresy that clung to the Templars provided the perfect pretext. Philip and his agents began to carefully collect and amplify these stories, preparing a case built on slander and insinuation. The charges would be shocking: heresy, idolatry, blasphemy, and sodomy. The aim was not just to dissolve the order but to annihilate its reputation so completely that no one, not even the Pope, would dare to defend it. The trap was sprung with chilling precision and coordination. In the pre-dawn darkness of Friday, the 13th of October, 1307, a date that would echo in superstition for centuries to come, royal agents moved simultaneously across the entire Kingdom of France. Armed with secret orders from the king, they stormed every Templar commandery, castle, and farm within French borders. The operation was a masterpiece of military logistics, catching the knights completely by surprise. They were, after all, in a friendly kingdom, and the king they served as bankers was the very man who now sought their destruction. Most were arrested without a fight, woken from their sleep and placed in chains. Among those seized was the order's elderly Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, who was in Paris at the time. He, along with the other senior Templars, was arrested and thrown into prison. The knights, who had faced down fearsome armies in the Holy Land, found themselves helpless captives of the French crown. The speed and scale of the operation were designed to be overwhelming, preventing any chance of organized resistance or escape. It was a swift, decapitating blow aimed at the very heart of the order. Within hours, the most powerful military religious institution in Christendom had been effectively neutralized within the Kingdom of France. Immediately following the arrests, the king's agents began to publicize the charges. Royal proclamations were read out in towns and villages, detailing the supposed horrific crimes of the knights. The carefully prepared list of accusations was designed to provoke maximum public outrage and disgust. The Templars, long admired as heroes of the faith, were now officially accused of being secret heretics, devil worshippers, and enemies of Christ. The shockwave of these allegations reverberated across Europe, leaving people stunned and confused. The narrative was controlled entirely by the French crown, which presented the arrests as a pious and necessary act to cleanse the kingdom of a great evil. With the knights imprisoned and isolated from one another, the next phase of Philip's plan began: the extraction of confessions. The evidence against the Templars was non-existent, relying solely on the rumors that had been cultivated by the king's own ministers. To make the charges stick, confessions were required, and Philip's men were prepared to obtain them by any means necessary. The arrested knights were handed over to royal inquisitors, experts in the grim art of interrogation. The sudden and violent fall of the order was complete. Now the long and brutal ordeal of the trials would begin. Once in the custody of King Philip's officials, the arrested Templars were subjected to a campaign of systematic and savage torture. The methods employed were those of the medieval Inquisition, designed to break the body and the will in order to extract a confession, regardless of its truthfulness. Knights were starved, deprived of sleep, and kept in squalid, lightless dungeons. They were stretched on the rack, their limbs slowly pulled from their sockets. Their feet were greased with fat and held over fire until the flesh burned and the bones were exposed. Other brutal techniques, such as crushing a prisoner with heavy weights or hoisting them by the wrists with their arms tied behind their back, were routinely used. Under such relentless agony, many of the knights broke. Faced with the choice between enduring unimaginable pain and admitting to the fantastical crimes they were accused of, a significant number confessed. They admitted to denying Christ, to spitting on the crucifix, to engaging in obscene kisses during their initiation ceremonies, and to worshiping an idol. These confessions, extracted under duress, were meticulously recorded by royal scribes and presented as irrefutable proof of the order's guilt. The fact that the confessions were often contradictory or described impossible events mattered little. The crown had the admissions it needed to legitimize its actions. However, a great number of knights displayed incredible fortitude. They refused to confess, maintaining their innocence and the piety of their order, despite the horrific torture they endured. Many died during these interrogations, their bodies broken but their silence intact. In Paris alone, 36 Templars died under torture without admitting to any wrongdoing. Their defiance was a testament to their discipline and their faith, but in the context of the trials it was often presented as further proof of guilt, their stubbornness seen as a sign of heretical pride, refusing to repent for their sins. The case of the Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, was typical. He initially confessed to some of the charges under immense pressure, likely after being shown the instruments of torture and being threatened with their use. His confession, even if partial and coerced, was a major propaganda victory for the king. With the leader of the order having admitted guilt, the case against the Templars seemed overwhelming. These confessions, torn from men in the depths of despair and pain, formed the entire basis of the prosecution's case. The truth had become irrelevant. The only thing that mattered was the scripted testimony required to condemn an entire order. News of the mass arrests and the horrific charges against the Templars sent shockwaves to the papal court. Pope Clement V, a Frenchman who owed his election to Philip's influence, was initially outraged. The Templars were a papal order, subject only to his authority. Philip's actions were a flagrant violation of church law and a direct challenge to papal supremacy. Clement immediately wrote to the French king, protesting the arrests, and demanding that the knights and their property be turned over to the church's control. He suspended the powers of the French inquisitors and declared his intention to launch his own papal investigation into the matter. However, Pope Clement was in a position of profound weakness. He resided not in Rome but in Avignon, a city on the edge of French territory, making him highly susceptible to pressure from the powerful French king. Philip IV responded to the Pope's protests with a campaign of intimidation and propaganda. He threatened to charge the late Pope Boniface VIII, Clement's predecessor and Philip's bitter enemy, with heresy posthumously, a move that would have caused a catastrophic scandal for the Church. Public opinion in France had been whipped into a frenzy against the Templars, and Philip presented himself as the pious defender of the faith, making it politically dangerous for Clement to oppose him. Caught between his duty to protect a papal order and the immense pressure from the French crown, Clement vacillated. He managed to launch his own papal commissions to interview the knights, and in these hearings, away from the king's torturers, many Templars bravely recanted their earlier confessions, proclaiming their innocence and detailing the brutal methods used to extract their testimony. This created a new problem for King Philip. In a desperate and ruthless move, he declared the recanting knights to be relapsed heretics, a crime punishable by death. In May 1310, 54 Templars were burned at the stake in a field outside Paris, a terrifying message to any others who might consider retracting their confessions. This brutal act broke the back of the Templar resistance and sealed the order's fate. Faced with an intransigent king and the threat of a major schism, Pope Clement finally capitulated. At the Council of Vienne in 1312, he did not declare the order guilty of heresy. The evidence was too weak and contradictory for that. But he issued a papal bull, Vox in Excelso, which officially suppressed the Knights Templar. He argued that the order's reputation had been too gravely damaged and had become a source of scandal for the Church, and therefore for the good of Christendom, it must be dissolved. It was a political solution, not a judicial one. The great financial and military empire of the Templars was officially and unceremoniously brought to an end, not by a verdict of guilt, but by the stroke of a reluctant pope's pen. When the Templars were crushed, King Philip IV expected to seize their legendary treasure. But when his men stormed the commanderies, they found the vaults empty. The vast fortune that had fueled the Templars' power had vanished without a trace. Theories abound. Some say a fleet slipped out of La Rochelle just before the arrests, carrying the treasure to safety. Did it go to Scotland, aiding Robert the Bruce? To Portugal, where the order survived under a new name? Or even across the Atlantic centuries before Columbus? The truth remains elusive. The treasure was never found. The Hospitallers inherited the Templars' lands but not their gold. This disappearance was the Templars' final act of defiance, denying Philip his prize. The legend of the lost treasure endures, fueling centuries of speculation and myth. The Templars' greatest secret was not their wealth, but their ability to make it vanish. Their story lives on, not just for their fall, but for the mysteries they left behind. The Templars' legacy survived in stone, symbol, and skill. Their round churches and carved seals still dot Europe, silent witnesses to their vanished empire. Their financial innovations, letters of credit, secure deposits, were absorbed by rising banking houses, shaping the future of commerce. Former Templar clerks and knights carried their expertise into new institutions, ensuring their methods lived on. Some believe the order survived underground, especially in Scotland and Portugal, passing down rituals and secrets in the shadows. Whether fact or legend, the idea of a hidden Templar tradition has inspired countless stories and conspiracies. Their symbols and codes became part of Europe's cultural DNA. The Templars' knowledge proved harder to destroy than their order. Their story is a reminder: ideas outlast empires. The echoes of the Templars still reverberate, hidden in plain sight. The most enduring theory of Templar survival links them to the Freemasons. Both groups share secret rituals, symbols, and a devotion to brotherhood and higher ideals. Masonic rites often reference the Templars, adopting their imagery and legends. Some claim a direct lineage, especially in Scotland, but historians find little concrete evidence. Most see the Masonic Templar connection as a later invention, a way to borrow the mystique of the medieval knights. Regardless, the myth persists, fueling fascination and debate. The Templar spirit, real or imagined, lives on in the rituals of modern fraternities. Their legend remains a powerful force in the Western imagination. The Templars' story ends not with their destruction, but with their transformation into legend. Their name conjures images of chivalry, betrayal, and hidden knowledge. Their rise and fall warn of the dangers of unchecked power and the fragility of institutions. Myths of lost treasure and secret survival keep their memory alive. The Templars have become symbols, guardians of mysteries, victims of ambition. Their silence is as powerful as their deeds, inviting us to search for truth beneath the legend. They were innovators, warriors, and believers, leaving a mark that endures in myth and memory. The Templars' true legacy is the enduring fascination they inspire. The flames that consumed Jacques de Molay forged an indestructible legacy. The Templars' financial innovations, secure transfers, coded information, international trust, became the backbone of modern banking. Their systems were too valuable to vanish, shaping commerce for centuries. Their downfall is a cautionary tale of state power crushing independent institutions. The Templars' destruction revealed how propaganda and torture can serve political ends. Their story warns of the dangers of unchecked authority and the cost of envy. From their ashes rose ideas that changed the world. The Templars were destroyed, but their influence endures in every ledger and law protecting financial trust. Their legacy is both practical and tragic, a testament to innovation and a warning from history. Among the ruins of Templar commanderies, the past lingers in silence. These stones are no longer centers of power but places of reflection and mystery. The true treasure is the story itself, a tapestry of ambition, faith, and human fallibility. The Templars bridged the worlds of war and finance, their innovations shaping Europe. Their unresolved mysteries invite endless fascination. They are now archetypes, symbols of lost chivalry and secrets just out of reach. Let the stones keep their silence. Their story endures as a quiet whisper in history. The Templars are gone, but their legend remains, echoing through time.